Okay, so hi everyone and everyone that will be watching this later on. Today our workshop is going to be about vitamin D, and we wanted to just cover vitamin D because we feel like it's a really hot topic where there's a lot of media attention around vitamin D. There's a lot of doctors and even holistic doctors that are talking about how important it is to supplement with it and how it's going to save you from COVID, essentially. So we're here to debunk that myth and to talk about why it's important not to supplement with vitamin D, actually. And I'm going to give kind of a brief, not so scientific explanation, and then we can jump into some questions if people have questions about what the details of it are and the specifics of the science behind it. Eric has done extensive research on vitamin D, and we really feel like it's, again, not something that we would supplement with, and it's a really bad idea for people to supplement with it. So the number one thing that we're going to start with is actual deficiency in vitamin D is very rare. So typically people with serious autoimmune disease or terminal kidney disease or tuberculosis are the kind of people who have vitamin D levels that are below 10, which is very low and would be indicative of chronic conditions like those. So that's actually not something that's common, even for someone who has an autoimmune disease, unless you are in a very late stage of the autoimmune disease or it's a very, very serious case, you would not probably have vitamin D levels that are that low. So 10 years, so some funny things that everyone should note. 10 years ago, the normal range for vitamin D changed from 20 to 30 units to 30 to 100 units. So essentially overnight, everyone became deficient in vitamin D because they said you needed to be 30 or higher in order to have a healthy vitamin D level. So where this came from is mostly bad research, and Eric can cite a lot of that. But the reality is you can't actually get a vitamin D level that's over 30 without supplementation. So if you do some research and you dig a little deeper into who's doing the studies and where they're coming from, you get to find out that this a man named Dr. Michael Hollick is the one that was putting out all of the research and doing all of the studies, essentially, that it changed this and was pushing for and lobbying for doctors to change the normal range. And so he, of course, is a business person as well, and actually is benefiting from the billion-dollar industry of vitamin D testing, supplements, etc. So he has his own supplement lines. He has his own vitamin D testing facilities and things like that. So it's a little fishy that just suddenly overnight, out of nowhere, everyone decided to suddenly became deficient because of the research based on this person who is benefiting from us taking vitamin D as a supplement. So there's that. And vitamin D is actually the fourth most prescribed blood test by doctors anywhere. So yeah, there's a lot of vitamin D testing that goes on, and everyone thinks they're deficient now. So the reality is there's actually 24 different types of vitamin D. And the only one that Dr. Hollick is pushing and all of this research is being done on is vitamin D3. And so that's the majority of the supplement. That's 90%, 99% of the supplements are vitamin D3. But our body actually needs many, many more different types of vitamin D and creates and makes those naturally. So vitamin D is a steroid as well as a hormone. Do you want to take a steroid and a hormone and hormones like on the regular? Is this something that you should be giving your infant or toddler? Probably not. it opens up calcium channels in the body and increases excess calcium, which causes or makes you more at risk for chronic respiratory infections, long-term COVID, anyone? So viruses use the calcium, that is the excess calcium, to manipulate cells and cause them to swell or become more hospitable to virus reproduction, while also suppressing the immune function that actually fights the infection. And it also suppresses inflammation, which in the short term has benefits, but then long term has like serious consequences. So the research shows that there's really no benefits to having vitamin D levels over 30. Like I said before, there's no benefits to having it over 30, but there are actual consequences for that. And there are detrimental things that cause calcification in the body and other chronic illness type symptoms. So the thing is that all of the studies that the media and doctors have been pushing for and advocating for in regards to long-term supplementation are actually just citing studies that have been done on those people that I said were below 10 in their vitamin D levels. So the media and everyone has this research, or is using this research and is advocating for everyone to take vitamin D to save them from COVID, when in reality, the research that says that vitamin D is good to save you from COVID is only meant for people who have terminal illness and have serious chronic conditions. So it's not beneficial to the actual average person. And so therefore there's actually no studies that have been done on, or there might have been studies, but they have not proven that long-term supplementation by well people is actually serving any function or actually improving people's health or wellness. So that's kind of the the quick and fast version of why you shouldn't be taking vitamin D supplementation. And then Eric can give some more details about the science behind it and why, we don't want to be taking the supplement, despite the fact that literally even your naturopath is possibly prescribing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rachel. And quite simply, as Rachel said, it's a steroid. It's a steroid that functions as a hormone, and it opens calcium channels. And hypercalcemia is extremely dangerous. And so researchers have said that using vitamin D therapeutically comes with too high of a risk of hypercalcemia. And so when it's used that way, it has to be used with what are called calcium channel blockers, so that the person doesn't become overcalcified. Otherwise, you're going to have serious problems. And so research has shown that excessive amounts of calcium is also directly causative to chronic pulmonary infection, because the viruses manipulate the calcium levels in the cells and cause the cells to expand, which weakens their membranes. So the viruses are free to come and go easier as they reproduce inside the cells. So this is a major concern and something that should definitely be considered, that supplementing with vitamin D as a prophylactic is really shooting yourself in the foot. So not only that, it suppresses your Th1 immunity, which is the type of T cells that fight infections, while upregulating Th2, which is more of the allergy type of immune response. And so Th1 is inflammatory, meaning that people who have chronic inflammation and autoimmune issues caused by Th1 overactivation might get a little bit of relief from taking vitamin D. But it doesn't fix the underlying problem. The low vitamin D is indicative of chronic infection, not a cause of it. So this just goes to show that, what they're doing to manipulate our thinking by saying, oh, look at these people who had severe COVID or died from COVID, who had average level of 10, is not suggestive of the general population at all. And so we need to really consider that we are not in that boat. If we are not in that boat, that we should not be acting like we are. And so now, that being said, yes, if I was in that boat and then got COVID and was, at high risk of, severe morbidity or death, then sure, some vitamin D might be a good idea to suppress some of the inflammatory response that is causing a lot of the damage and creating the higher risk in more severe COVID cases. Otherwise, that is not suggestible at all. And if it's a hormone, a steroid, our body is regulating that. And so if we start ingesting steroids of any kind, we start manipulating, messing with our natural balance of these hormones, these signals that are keeping our body in balance and creating arbitrary conditions that might not be ideal. So where do we go from here? One is that we need to first understand, like, okay, most likely we're not at high risk of having dangerously low vitamin D levels, right? Those are only with certain conditions, certain very acute chronic conditions of chronic inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, terminal kidney disease, kidney failure, and certain other similar conditions that you would already be getting treated for, which then may involve medically supplementing vitamin D. But otherwise, if not, there's no reason to assume you're low, especially in the winter, right? When levels should be lower, we have less sunlight. That doesn't mean a problem. We have stored levels, we have stored hormone D that is released as necessary, even when there's no sun. Just means maybe we're not producing as much. It's just not a problem. And so to assume that we're all deficient and that we should be supplementing is putting us into a category that we are very unlikely to actually be in, and then puts us at risk of creating these conditions of hypercalcemia, hypervitaminosis D. And my own personal experience was that supplementing with D for several years created extremely awful sinusitis and chronic rhinitis. So my allergy symptoms became unbearable because of that. And I found that I was much more susceptible to the chronic sinus infections and chronic mold infection because of that role that calcitriol, vitamin D3, plays in suppressing our Th1 immunity and increasing Th2. Remember, Big Thunder. That was close. Th1 fights infections. Th2 creates the allergic type of response. And that is what hormone D is doing. And so our body is going to be naturally regulating that to keep these responses in balance depending on what it's being exposed to. So if we start arbitrarily messing with that by supplementing, we're doing essentially hormone steroid therapy. And we are changing the biochemical conditions of our body without really knowing what we're doing. So is that making sense?
Yep.
Cool. So if somebody asks you, oh, hey, are you taking D? D is so great, COVID, you can now hopefully clearly articulate why you don't think it's a good idea, and then open their mind to the idea that, oh, perhaps using this steroid hormone, which is readily available at every health food store and on Amazon, basically as a self-administered drug, hormone therapy, might not be a good idea for them either. Because the reality is that unless it's, in these very rare conditions that we've already discussed, or somebody who's terminally ill with a infection like COVID, certainly would not apply to use these drugs that way.
But it's in so many things. It's like everything, everywhere you look. It's like vitamin D milk. It's good for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's in cereal, it's in everything. And I think that just goes to show, right, is that, like Einstein says, you can't keep doing the same thing expecting a different result. We've been supplementing with vitamin D for quite a long time. Many people without even really knowing that they've been doing it. And it is not yielding the results, the benefits that were promised by manipulated science.
Yeah, so it goes to show you that everything can be tweaked or manipulated to skew to people's view of what's good to put in the body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just look at how they've manipulated the perception of vitamin D deficiency, right? Everybody thinks they're vitamin D deficient without any evidence to say so, or, because they have gotten tested and because the ranges have moved. If somebody has a level of 30, well, now that's the new bottom of the range. So they might go, oh my gosh, I'm D deficient. I have very low D levels. When in fact, all the research before that, when they did major extensive studies on, large populations comparing healthy and unhealthy people, and the vitamin D levels for healthy people were 20 to 40. And now everybody thinks they're deficient. And then they say, oh, look, people with vitamin D deficiency get COVID and die. And you look at those papers and you see those people had levels of an average level of 10. Average. So there are people even lower than 10, which is not indicative of people in the general population.
So what do people do? They get totally fearful, and that totally raises their cortisol levels and creating all kinds of problems in their body because they have all this stress now.
Yeah,
now they've created another problem.
Right. Yeah, and hypercalcemia. I look at what people post questions about, on all these different natural health groups, and 9 times out of 10, the symptoms they're complaining about are often related to hypercalcemia, like digestive issues and joint and muscle pain, and poor dental health, chronic cystic acne and skin problems, sinusitis, and all of these other issues that are, very likely something they're self-inducing because they've been supplementing with vitamin D.
And I have a question for you, Eric. Would just stopping taking the vitamin D supplement actually improve symptoms quickly, or would it take time for the body to show improvement after you stop taking it? If you've been unknowingly drinking vitamin D fortified milk, even if it was organic, for years.
Well, so I was taught to take very high doses of vitamin D every day when I was studying natural health with all these different health gurus, and I can say that when I stopped, it definitely took a little while because the steroid hormone D is stored in tissues, and the calcification that it causes doesn't just disappear. So the D and the calcium don't just immediately vanish. Mm-hmm. And so it does take time. And one of the things that really helped was taking vitamin K2 and reintroducing dairy and drinking bone broth. So these are all ways to help the body deal with the calcification, and then the levels of D that were built up in the system. Well, again, this is a hormone, a steroid hormone, so the body regulates that itself. And since active calcitriol has a storage non-active form, the body can put it into the storage form and put it away somewhere, or as a steroid can then break it down. So if the body is able to self-regulate that way, and you stop supplementing the D, you will at least stop causing more harm.
But it will take.
How does the bone broth, the dairy, and say the K2, or it's been using the K, triple K or whatever it has.
So it's a hormone called osteocalcin. So K2 activates osteocalcin. You need K2 and osteocalcin to take the calcium and put it into bones and teeth where it's needed. All right. And that's why all these studies that are like, oh, look, hormone D regulates calcium, but doesn't improve bone density, actually increases the risk of atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of calcium in the arteries, right? And now these other issues, unless we include K2 with it. But then if you look at studies that just focus on K2 without the D, you get the same results, if not better. And so they've confounded that by saying, oh, well, if you want the benefits of D, you have to take K. The reality is you get even more benefits without the D, just taking the K. Then dairy and bone broth naturally contain osteocalcin. So that's just a good source of it in our diet.
Right. So basically you have calcium, but in the wrong places. And just like anything, things have the places right to be. I mean, you got to put gas in the gas tank, not gas in and where you're driving. Because if you put gas into where you're driving, you're gonna end up dead.
Right. Yeah. If you just pump a bunch of gas into your inside, on your seats in your car, that's gonna cause a lot of inflammation. And the same idea here, right? So yeah, excess calcium and from the high vitamin D is fueling inflammation, and that is a major contributor to osteoarthritis, where calcium builds up outside of the bones and the joints and the soft tissue, and that's a very painful inflammatory condition that literally looks like, you look at x-rays of people with osteoarthritis, it looks like coral reef, and that is essentially what we're doing, loading up on taking hormone D, turning our bodies into a coral reef.
Yeah, I went to the doctors, and they, and after I hurt my hip, and they said, and I did a number of studies, so I was like, oh, you got osteoporosis, and probably, it was from all these, the way I've been eating and vitamin D taking and all these different things, I guess.
Yeah, and then eating too much like dark leafy greens that are high in oxalates.
Oh, yeah, because that's, my diet would be like salmon and broccoli rabe or kale.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and that all those calcium crystals, which is what oxalates are, the calcium oxalates, your body can't dissolve them, so they stay as crystals, and then they just end up in places in the body where you end up with these sharp, jagged, pieces like glass particles.
So yeah, it's so interesting that people think that they go to the salad, all these salad joints now think they're so so healthful, like, and people eating like freaking raw kale.
Right. Yeah, tons of it with some sort of PUFA loaded dressing, right? The polyunsaturated fats in these vegetable oils, and then inevitably there's nightshades in there too, which also contribute to this problem. And a lot of people don't realize like nightshades contain calcitriol, D3. And so that's why I liken it to death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Because people, oh, well, it's just a little bit. But yeah, but hey, look, you're eating them all day, every day, sometimes in concentrated amounts, right? Like with hot sauces and, tomato sauces and, things like that. And we're eating them consistently over a lifetime. And that definitely adds up. It's telling our bodies to absorb more calcium and opening up those calcium channels and creating the conditions of autoimmune. Cool. So, any other questions from anybody? Otherwise, that was hopefully a helpful workshop. Camellia?
Hey, I got in here late, but so I have this vitamin D. It's D3K2
Yep.
by that fancy brand called Quicksilver Scientific. It's nano emulsified.
Right. So that just means it's more effective poison.
Jeez.
Yeah. Anything I've learned now, that anything that says nano-emulsified and liposomal and all that stuff, that is just making it, because it could be something that is good, right? Like the K2 in there.
Yeah.
But when you turn it into that form, the body can no longer regulate what it absorbs, what it wants, what it needs.
Okay.
Okay, so it can turn something like that very quickly into a good thing into a bad thing.
Okay.
But then clearly that has D3 in it as well. All right, so as soon as that stuff touches your tongue, it's going to open up your calcium channels and tell your body to absorb more calcium from your intestines. And if that calcium is not there, then it activates your pituitary or your parathyroid, sorry. And your parathyroid releases a hormone that then leaches calcium from your bones to meet the demand of that hormone signaling.
You have to take it from somewhere.
Exactly.
That's why if the wrong things happen, I mean, your muscles will start to ache because the muscles are actually robbing the bones of the calcium, whether
Exactly.
it should be,
Yep. And that's why hypercalcemia, the symptoms include muscle pain, joint pain, stomach pain, right? Constipation, all that stuff that comes from excessive amounts of calcium clogging up the muscle signaling, right? Because calcium's excitatory. Calcium causes contraction and has to be balanced by magnesium, potassium, and sodium. And so if we're taking all this calcium and constantly flooding our system, or taking all this vitamin D and constantly flooding our system with calcium, then we don't have the proper electrolyte balance to allow our bodies, our muscles to relax.
Okay.
right.
Wow.
So
That's
that
a
happens.
really expensive supplement. I haven't been taking it ever since I started working with you, but I keep meaning to ask you about it because of how like hyped it is. I have friends who take that stuff.
Share the article we just wrote. We just posted an article. Rachel just made a little 5-minute video we're going to post in the next day or so. That's kind of summarizing that as well. But just looking at the research and I think a lot of people they might be scared, so they're looking for something to give them to hang on to give them some sense of security. And unfortunately, that's being manipulated to their detriment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's our job to, first educate ourselves and then share information. And the reality is, like, I share this information and some people get very angry. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to consider it, because it's taking away their safety blanket.
Yeah. So a brand like that, I think that it makes really good quality supplements. Like, would it be good to buy something like the K2 from them?
No, liposomal stuff, I definitely don't recommend. You're going to pay way too much for something that doesn't benefit from that sort of delivery method.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yep. Again, the focus is always on, are you getting some of this, at least some of this stuff from your food, from your diet first?
Yeah.
And then supplement what you're getting. Right. Versus, and nothing against him. He's helped a lot of people. I've used his products,
Yeah.
totally fine. If we're using them for damage control, okay, maybe that would be an appropriate form, right? But for the general population, if diet is correct and we're not, we're not in the ICU, then our diet needs to be dialed in first.
Yeah. I had one more question, actually. Like, so eating things like kale and collards and all those denser leaves, even if they're steamed, like, it's not good for us.
So it might not be conducive to what you're doing, right? This isn't about good or bad. This is about, what is my goal, and is that going to help me get there?
Yeah.
Right. So now, if like we got a bag of spinach in our farm share box. We're not going to throw it away. We cooked it and put that in with some eggs and had fruit and turkey bacon or something with it, or toast and whatever, right? So this isn't.
We eat it like once every like 2 or 3 weeks. Like,
yeah, at most, right? Even salad, we eat salad once in a while, but keeping all of these things in the moderation that works for you, right? Because you don't want to assume something's good or bad. We gotta first find our baseline, so we know that, hey, this baseline is working, and then experiment. Oh, how much kale can I eat without creating symptoms with my thyroid, or flaring up my gout, or something, whatever it is, or creating heart palpitations, or stomach pain that might be happening, right? So if we're in a constant state of distress, it's impossible to tell what's causing what.
Yeah.
So if we know that is potentially contributing to our distress, okay, leave it out long enough to then test it in a condition where you can be absolutely sure, oh, okay, I had this issue and I ate that kale yesterday, and now I know.
Yeah.
Right?
and you want to be very scientific about it too, because
Yeah.
Just as an example, Eric might have eaten some nightshades and had some alcohol over the weekend. And I said, you can't blame either one of them specifically, because you don't know which one it was that was causing your stomach to hurt, like,
Right.
because you had them together.
Yeah, I had two variables.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that whole thing very well, actually. I've been told that about like spiritual practices and stuff, like just because,
same thing.
like, how do you know what's actually helping you if you're doing all of these things at the same time?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you guys.
Sure. So yeah, this was, the goal here was like to just kind of discuss why we're so adamant against supplementing with hormones. Corticosteroid hormone D is the full name, and you can call it calcitriol, is the real name. It's not a vitamin, it's a hormone, it's a steroid.
Mm-hmm.
And so really want to drive that point home, that consuming it more than what's naturally occurring in certain foods, right? There's a little bit in mushrooms and other plants that are, exposed to sunlight, naturally occurring. It may just be something that we naturally use to defend, like our skin produces it to defend itself against the sunlight, because there's a lot of evidence that, D production that increases as a result of exposure to UV light is a protective mechanism to stop the destruction of folate in the skin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it explains why people with darker melanated skin don't need as much D.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's another aspect of this, right, is that it's also kind of almost predatory against people of color, making them all out to be defective in terms of, oh, you don't produce as much D because you have dark skin, which is, well, that's an adaptation so that they don't need as much D.
It was perfectly healthy for their DNA.
Yeah. And then obviously, again, if we go back into, okay, what constitutes a real D deficiency? Okay, an average of 10, okay, which is half to a third of the healthy range.
I have a friend who he's studying under this man from India, and they're so adamant about the harm and the karma that we're creating through eating animal protein, like animal meat. And I'm like, there's a part of me that is really drawn to learning more about Ayurveda in the future. And at the same time, like, I just wonder, what do you guys think about that?
The karma of eating meat?
Yeah. That whole concept, and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to put it bluntly is that using religious dogma and to scare people into doing things that are not actually in their best interest is bad karma.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's very unrealistic to believe that things don't have to die in order for you to live. Like, that is essentially spiritual bypassing. Like, like you're ignoring the fact that even if you're a vegetarian, like, that bugs die every day, well, like, in your food as part of what you are. Like, there's a lot of, there is no perfection, and it's placing value on one life over another that I don't think that is healthy either. Like, all things are living, all things have like on a spiritual, like energetic level, all things, plants, animals, like they all have energy, they all have life force in them. Yeah. And to place the value of the life force of an animal over a plant is, I just don't think that it's necessary. Like, so.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, right. And one cow can feed a family for an entire year, one life. Mm-hmm. And to raise that cow literally just spent, like a year and a half of its life chilling in a pasture with a bunch of its homies. Maybe they even had a companion donkey, and like there's no violence or destruction in that. And in fact, it's repairing the soil and restoring balance, and is a part of an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. Versus, I've got to, till this soil and kill all of these pests and rodents and grow all of my lentils, and all of that hard labor that goes into that, right? Farm workers are often mistreated, they're overworked, it's abusive conditions, they're not
Yeah.
and so is eating that cow worse karma than the dozens, if not hundreds, of humans that have to suffer to produce the equivalent protein, or all of the rodents and insects that are killed from farming practices, right? So the reality is that acting as if our diet creates moral superiority. It's that one of my favorite all-time movie quotes from Fight Club. Brad Pitt says, "Sticking feathers up your butt doesn't make you a chicken."
Yeah.
So just because somebody is not eating meat doesn't mean that they actually are a good person, that they deserve good karma. That like Hitler was a vegetarian, supposedly.
What?
So
I didn't even know that.
yeah. So do we honor the lives that allow us to exist, and what do we do with that? What difference do we make in the world? Because you can be a vegetarian taker just as easily.
Charles Manson was a vegetarian too.
Yeah.
Please.
Right. Yeah, he was a peace and love hippie.
But yeah. Just because it takes so much protein, and when you're protein deficient, you're more angry.
Yeah.
It's part of
Makes
it.
sense. Totally makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
support
I got
local
to
farms.
ask these questions.
I guess I was a pescatarian, and I even explored the raw diet, and
You're in good company, Eric. Everyone here has.
Yeah, totally.
and so and then I just like look back at this like, well, if you look back at how things were at one point, people lived on the land, and they lived in this kind of ecosystem, total ecosystem, natural kind of ecosystem of everything. So you would maybe raise some stuff on the farm, but you'd work with your cows or chickens, and they would be part of the family, and and then it'd take time to maybe cultivate them for food. Then they came in and a big part of you. So now I just look on this how we've kind of skewed away from this natural way of living, and now we're making all these crazy alternatives to meat. We're making all these crazy alternatives to milks.
Yeah.
Look at the almond. The almond milk industry has been some of the most detrimental to the environment.
Mm-hmm.
How much water it takes to make the almonds.
They transport bees from Australia to California every year just to pollinate the almond crops, and that it goes for the organic too. And I was one of those people that cut out dairy to to choose almond milk and stuff like that, and the reality was it didn't it didn't solve any problems for me, and in fact probably contributed to them worsening, and if people take the time to like look below like the surface of like, okay, what's the image and the branding that I'm being sold on versus what's the reality happening underneath, then we'll start to see it's like the Wizard of Oz, right? If we look behind the curtain, that we've been duped into believing, first of all, that that climate change is somehow my fault, and completely ignoring the destructive practices of industries and the U.S. Department of Defense, which is the number one polluter on the planet, right? But no, it's because I eat local grass-fed steak. Greta's gonna come kick my butt.
I think stop. No, I think that part of it too is that we're just also just having been removing ourselves so far from our food system, is and the corporatization of the food system and the I don't know how to say this, but like making all food technologically savvy, or turning food into technology instead of the basic necessity that it is, has created all of these monsters of that are actually doing more destruction, and everyone is ignoring the fact that they are doing significantly more harm than they are actually doing good, by planting, they're taking over the rainforest to plant soy. They're not doing it for cows, they're planting soy. And that that it's yeah.
Right.
I wanted to say something about because I mean, most people have probably done the vegan and vegetarian, and there's all this dogma attached to it. And even the mentioning of, because I've done Ayurveda and there's, all this kind of stuff. And my whole thinking when I go back to it, even now, it's you have to compare how you feel when you're eating in this metabolic way, pro-metabolic way, as opposed to the vegan or vegetarian. And let's take emotion out of it, or religion or anything. And it's it's undeniable, the difference in how you look and how you feel. And I also think about okay, if this stuff is so good, then why is things not improving? People's healths are not improving, the environment is not improving. So it's all these practices that have been put in place, they haven't fixed anything for anyone. So it's, I just find it kind of interesting, because I'm it's not intuitive. So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was sharing information with somebody who was asking all these questions, in a group, and she goes, yeah, I don't agree with what, with what you're suggesting, and it doesn't work for me. And I go, oh, you've tried all of this stuff? And she's like, no, but it won't work because sugar is bad. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, well, good luck.
Right.
The sugar, when you start actually incorporating sugar, fruit and just honey and maple syrup and stuff like that into your diet, and get away from the stevias and all that, your sugar cravings go away.
Yeah.
So
right.
It's
you have cravings for a reason.
but it makes sense. When you're oh, and I know a lot of people are oh, I have a sweet tooth. And I'm yeah, because you're constantly suppressing sugar. You're not using it. And instead you're doing all these fake sugars, and you're still struggling with. So it's come on, guys, it just makes sense.
Your body is begging for energy. And that's why I see people that are oh, I think that starving myself on just water and sunlight will magically heal my body. And it's okay, so let's imagine you have a house that's it's all falling apart and full of mold and all that stuff. And you're gonna renovate it without any money or materials or people to do the labor. You're just gonna pour water on it and let the sun in. That sounds great. Yeah, I wish it worked. I wish it worked that way.
Okay. Anyone else have anything else? Anything about vitamin D or about animal products? Anything before we wrap up?
So like,
Rachel,
oh, okay.
I've been meaning to ask you about that. I don't know if you've seen that brand called Mad Hippie.
Mhm.
That's like beauty products at Whole Foods. I have to send you personally like some photos because I've been using this like product of theirs that's been really good for my skin. I don't think it has any PUFAs, but I want to get their face cream but I think I'm but yeah, I need to reread. I'm gonna sit down with a notebook and like reread all of these lessons that you guys have written so that I can really understand what I am doing. But I
Yeah,
with
send me a picture of the ingredient list if you have it, and then we'll go from there.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I just had a question because like I have a friend who has like he had a physical and the doctor was like, oh, you have like so much vitamin D, like a ton of vitamin D. And I'm like, what are, because I came late. So I'm assuming like, what are the connected like physical issues when you have an excess of vitamin D? Because I'm just curious, like,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah. So great, good question. Let's take a look. All right, so like we were okay. So first of all, there's hypervitaminosis D. Okay. And signs and symptoms: dehydration, vomiting, diarrhea, decreased appetite, irritability, constipation, fatigue, muscle weakness, and metastatic calcification of the soft tissues, right? So turning your body into a coral reef. But I mean, how many people do we know that have at least several of these that may be supplementing with D or just eating lots of nightshades? Because eating lots of nightshades is the equivalent of vitamin D supplementation. Okay. Now, what are some of the causes? What does this cause? Hypercalcemia, and you'll see, very similar, very similar symptoms here, right? So we see a lot of the same stuff, including irregular heartbeats, which I see that a lot in the biohacking groups. People are like, "Oh, I have heart palpitations," and da da da. What do you think that's from? Or I have, I get really dizzy when I stand up. What do you think that is about? Well, you're doing that to yourself. Fatigue, nausea, vomiting, loss of appetite. Oh, it's so easy for me to not eat. I just go days without eating. Fasting is so easy, and I love that now that's being validated by bad research, right? And then I see this a lot, right? And the
But
increase.
fasting rare is different, right? Because I
Yeah.
know a lot of people.
If you're metabolically well, right, your body is strong, and then you use fasting as a spiritual practice, right? Great, because it goes for the spiritual practices as well, right? If you're going to do spiritual practice to try to fix your problems, you don't end up anywhere. You just end up with like an addictive type of relationship to that, and that's exactly what happens with I experienced that. I was addicted to fasting, right? And in the worst cases, it's cardiac arrest. And I always point out, like, when people go, "Oh, that really incredible naturopath that was so healthy, they suddenly dropped dead from a heart attack." And it was obviously the CIA and big pharma. No. This is somebody who's probably pushing D on everybody and taking a ton of it themselves and eating tons of high calcium, high oxalate foods, and gave himself a heart attack. Okay. But then if we look up, so high cal citriol complications. Okay. One of them is that, so let's see, because I was just looking at it, it contributes to metastatic cancer. Let's see. Sure, I found it on my phone, but now I can't find it here. So
Does it answer your question, Jenny? Like, is that
oh, yeah, here's one.
Yes. Because another thing that I've noticed, and I don't know if this is connected to the metastatic calcification, because this person also has, like, if you go through his body, like, you can almost feel like popping in his, like, and he has very slow blood, like his circulation of his legs, or like he feels his legs are heavy. And if you, like, you almost like pop, like, I don't know if it's fascia or what, but I'm like, what is that? Like, cause it's, and I'm wondering if it has any connection to that. Obviously the digestive stuff and all those other things are obviously there.
Yep.
So.
That's calcification. Yeah. Calcification. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
as Eric was saying, it turns you into a coral reef on the inside.
Yeah, it's like a popping,
So
it's like a bumpy core. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. So, this is X-rays of showing the calcification, right? Look at this. Okay. And so part of what happens too is that, these conditions elevate a hormone called prolactin, right? That under healthy conditions is the hormone that, like, thickens the uterine lining for menstruation and, increases the mammary glands for milk production, and for men, it's for producing sperm. But when that becomes elevated as a result of elevated calcium and calcitriol levels, that creates malignancy. So that causes PCOS and fibroids, and then, as I was trying to find that research about malignancy and metastatic cancers, there's a lot of research about that relationship. And then chronic pulmonary infections. So yeah, so granulomatous. So that's like granuloma is like inflammation in the alveola from calcium, right? And let's see, is this one? Yep. Okay. So look, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases have elevated D3, right? Treated with prednisone, so hormone, steroid, right? So there's this very direct relationship that we can go into, but I touch on a lot of this in the article. All right. So we're a little bit over time. For your friend, yeah, he's calcifying himself. And, if you look up atherosclerosis, it's calcification of the arteries.
All right. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will share that information.
And we'll have a video that's going to come out on like Thursday probably, that I do a little summary of like the call, so you can share that with them if that's helpful. Too. Plus the blog post is heavy in the science, but it's good. It's okay.
Yep.
All right.
Great.
All right, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one. We'll see you later.
Bye.